Hello everyone. In this video, I'll explain how we can apply k-means algorithm for clustering a given dataset. So what does mean by clustering? Clustering analysis in data mining means that to find out the group of objects which are similar to each other in the group, but it will be different from the object in other groups. So in the process of clustering, in what we do is basically the set of data will be dividing into groups or classes based on their similarity. So here let us consider an example which is given data set 2, 4, 10, 12, 3, 20, 20, 11, 25. So we will see how we can cluster this data set by using k-means algorithm. So in the given question, it is given that we need to divide this data set into two clusters. So how we can go about solving this one is we can have several methods to solve. Let us consider first method, in which what we do is we will be randomly assigning means. So as you know, we have to cluster this into two groups, means we have two clusters. So since there are two clusters, we have to randomly assign two means. So we are randomly assigning two means so that here we are just taking m1 is equal to 3 and m2 is equal to 4. So this is the just randomly assigning the means. Now what we do is, from this given data set, whichever numbers are closer to this mean, we will be assigning to that particular cluster. So let us consider for mean m1 is equal to 3, we have a cluster k1, and for mean m2 is equal to 4, we have another cluster k2. So we have two clusters k1 and k2. So how will be assigning the data points to this clusters? So we have this mean as 3 here for the first cluster, and for the second cluster we have the mean as 4. So from the given data set, we know that here 2 is closer to 3, and then we can have 3 is also there, which is at the same point. So we can have 2 and 3 as the first cluster elements, and the remaining elements 4, 10, 12, 20, 20, 11, 25 we can put it in k2. So how we are doing is like we will be comparing the value with the mean, and the values which are closer to that particular mean we will be assigning to that cluster. Okay, so here we have two clusters. Now what we have, as I already said, we have k1 is equal to 2, 3 and k2 is equal to this values. Now this is the first step. Now what we have to do is, now we already got some values in each cluster, that is k1 and k2. So now we can actually find the actual mean of these values. Previously what we have done is we have randomly chosen two means, that is 3 and 4. Now we can calculate the mean of each cluster. So for the cluster K1, with the mean which we are getting, new mean what you are getting is 2.5, that is 2 plus 3 divided by 2. So take the sum of this values and divide by the total number of data points will give you the mean. So for the second cluster, we are getting the mean as 16. So here we can see we got the mean as 16. Now what we have to do is, in the second round, our means are 2.5 and 16. Now we have to assign this data point, the same data points here we have to assign it to each cluster based on this distance. So now we need to check which all points are near to this mean 2.5 and which all data points are near to the mean 16. So depending upon that, we will be assigning the data points to that particular cluster. So in the second step, we have assigned two data point 2, which is closer to 2.5, 3 is also closer to 2.5, 4 is also closer to 2.5, because 16 you can see it is far away. Then we can have this 10, 12, 20, all this are closer to the data point mean 16. So we are assigning this as this. In the second step, we got the clusters like this. Now what we have to do is we have to again calculate the mean from here, because we got some data points under each cluster. So what we will be doing is we'll be again taking the mean of k1 and k2. So when you take the mean of k1, you are getting it as 3, and when you are taking the mean of k2, we are getting it as 18. Now the same step we have to repeat it, that is we have to take all the data points which are closer to this mean 3 to that particular cluster, and all the data points which are closer to this mean 18, we have to put it in the cluster k2. So we got as a new values in cluster k1 as 2, 3, 4 and 10, because these values are closer to mean 3. And we got in cluster k2 12, 20, 30, 11 and 25. That is because it is closer to the value 18. Now here, now again what we have to do is, now we got again two clusters here, K1 and K2, and we got the data points inside each cluster. Again we need to find the mean. Now when you are finding the mean for K1, we are getting it as 4.75, and when you are finding the mean of K2, we are getting it as 19.6. Now what we have to do? Again we have to see that which all data points are closer to this 4.75 and which all data points are closer to 19.6. So whichever are closer to 4.75, that is a mean of cluster K1, we will be assigning to that cluster. So we can see that 2, 3, 4, 10, 11, 12, these are all closer to 4.75. And 20, 30, 25 are closer to 19.6. So we have again got two clusters, data points K1 in clusters K1 and K2. Then what is again the same thing we need to repeat, that is we have to again find the mean of this K1 cluster and mean of this K2 cluster. Okay, so we got the mean as 7 and now we got the mean as 25. Now what we have to do, we have to again check the values which are closer to this mean 7 and the data points which are closer to this value 25. So depending upon the values, we can assign it to the clusters K1 and K2. So this is K1. So K1 is, we got the values as 2, 3, 4, 10, 11, 12, and K2 we got it like this. Now, if you compare this step 7 and 10, we can see that this K1 is 2, 3, 4, 10, 11, 12. And in step 8 also, if you see, K1 is 2, 3, 4, 10, 11, 12. And in step 7, we can see K2 is 20, 30 and 25. And here in step 8 also, 20, 30 and 25. That means in the previous two steps, the clusters data points remains the same. So we can stop the iteration here. So the final clusters we got are K1 is equal to 2, 3, 4, 10, 11, 12 and K2 is equal to 20, 30, 25. So this is how we can do clustering by means of the first method. So let me explain about the second method. So we have the data set, the same example I have taken. So in the previous example, what we have done is a given set of data points, we will be randomly choosing means. And then what we do in the second step, we will be assigning the data points which are closer to the means and classify into clusters. Now here in this one, what we do is we will be randomly assigning, we are instead of taking mean initially, we are directly forming two clusters with random values. Okay, so here what I have done is we have randomly chosen, these are the two clusters K1 and K2. So I had randomly chosen the alternate values, that is 2, 10, 3, 30, 25. So you can randomly choose any values. So here I had chosen the alternate values here to the cluster K1 and cluster K2 the remaining values. So we got two clusters here. So this two of K1 and K2 are randomly chosen. So now we can find the mean for this cluster K1. We got it as 14, and for cluster K2 the mean we got it as 11.75. Mean how will you find? It is 4 plus, for the cluster K2, 4 plus 12 plus 20 plus 11 divided by 4. So the sum of this data points divided by the total number of data points will give you the mean. So we got the mean there. Now the steps are similar to the previous method. That is, now we got a mean. So what we do is we will be comparing each data point with this mean value and assign that according to the each cluster. So M1 is equal to 14. If the data points are closer to 14 means it will be assigned to the cluster K1, and if the data points are closer to this M2 mean, that is 11.75, then we will be assigning those values to K2. So we are reassigning that one. So we got K1 as this one. So we got K1 in 20, 30, 25 because these are closer to the mean 14. And we got K2 as 2.4, 2, 4, 10, 12, 3, 11 because it is closer to this 11.75. Now, so again what we have to do is we have to find the mean again for this K1 and K2. We found again mean that for a first cluster we got the mean as 25. For the second cluster we got the mean as 7. Now what we'll be doing, we'll be assigning these values again to each cluster. So whichever values data points are closer to this 25, we will be assigning to cluster K1. and whichever value is closer to 7 we will be assigning to cluster K2. So we have done again the reassigning. So we got here 20, 30, 25, K2 also this one. So when we evaluated the mean, we got it as 25 and this one. So when you observe this one, we can see that in this two steps, the clusters K1 and K2 remains the same. You can see there is no change in the data values for this two steps. That is in step 3 and 4, we got the same values. That means our iteration, we can stop here and the final values of clusters are this one. So we got the final values of cluster K1 and K2 as this one. So this is the second method. So in the first method, what we have done is we have randomly assigned the mean and then we continued with the assignment of this data points which were closer to the mean. In the second method, what we have done is we have randomly chosen two cluster group, that is K1 and K2, and then we found the mean and then assigned the values. So both the methods, you can see that the clustering values are the same. You got the same values for the data values for the clusters. Now let us see another example. So we have an example given here. 2, 3, 6, 8, 9, 12, 15, 18, 22. So this is the data set. And what we are going to do is we are going to use k-means algorithm to create 3 clusters. In the previous example, we have seen only 2 clusters. So here we are using 3 clusters. So the process or the procedure is exactly the same. Only thing is we are grouping it into 3 clusters. Previous example, we were having only K1 and K2. So here we need 3 clusters. So we will take K1, K2 and K3. So we have 3 clusters, K1, K2 and K3. So we are randomly assigning 3 clusters. So the second method I am using, we are randomly assigning 2, 8, 15 to cluster K1. That is the first cluster. For the second cluster, I had given 3, 9, 18. And for the third cluster, I had put 6, 12 and 22 in the third cluster. So, and then what we will be doing is we will be evaluating mean for each cluster. So what we have done is this first step here, we have randomly chosen 3 clusters K1, K2, K3 with randomly selected data points. Then we have evaluated the mean. Now in the second step, what we do, each mean, so for mean 8.3 that belongs to cluster K1, mean 10 means it is belonging to cluster K2, mean 13.3 means it is belonging to cluster K3. So the values which are closer to 8.3 will come under cluster K1. The values which are closer to mean 10 will come under cluster K2, and the data values which are closer to 13.3 will come under cluster K3. So now we have chosen. So when we are reassigning, we got that for cluster K1, we got it as 2, 3, 6, 8, 9 as the elements. And for cluster K2, K2 is mean is 10. So we are not finding any closer points for that one. So we are just taking the mean as 0. So here we will be taking now K3. Here K3 is 12, 15, 18 and 22 and mean is 16.75. So here we have chosen this one 2, 3, 6, 8, 9 in the cluster K1, and in cluster K2 we have not kept anything. So the mean is chosen, mean will be 0, and in cluster K3 we have chosen this elements and mean is 16.75. Now what we do is now we will be reassigning again the values, that is according to the mean value. So according to the mean value, when we reassign, we get cluster K1 as 3, 6, 8, 9. Then cluster K2 we got one value because 2 is closer to 0. Then in cluster K3 we got this values 12, 15, 18 and 22. So again we evaluated the means. Again what we do, we have to reassign the values. So means are 6.52 and 16.75. So in K1 we got it as 689, K2 we got it as 23, K3 we got it as 12, 15, 18, 22. Again we evaluated the mean, we got it as 7.6, 2.5 and 16.75 with respect to each cluster. Again we are reassigning the values. So we got K1 is equal to 689, K2 23, K3 12, 15, 18, 22. So again we have reassigned here. You can see that this two steps here, this one and this one, K1, K2, K3 remains the same. There is no change in the cluster value. So that means the iteration we can stop here. So the final clustering will be K1 is equal to 6, 8, 9. K2 is equal to 2, 3. K3 is 12, 15, 18 and 22. So this is how we can do clustering for using k-means algorithm. So either one of the method we can use. You can either randomly choose some mean values initially, or what we can do is we can randomly choose the clusters, and then we can do the reassigning of the data values. And we will be stopping this. The stopping criteria is that the last two steps, if the cluster data points remains the same, then we can stop the algorithm. So this is how we will be clustering. We'll be using k-means algorithm for clustering a given set of data points. Hope you understood. Thanks for watching.